roasted flavor from the bone, crispy rendered beef fat, and perfectly cooked steak. Today, we're talking bone-in ribeye and how to get the most out of it in the home kitchen. Starting with the bone, the romantic notion that bone-in adds flavor is a myth in the context of a steak. At medium rare, the marrow is only beginning to soften. That's why when you roast marrow for consumption, you often do it at temperatures above 200 degrees Celsius. The collagen is nowhere near the temperature or time required to become gelatin. Think about the famous bone broths, Vietnamese pho, Japanese tonkotsu. We're talking about at least 6 hours, but often days at much higher temperature. So what does it bring besides presentation? Well, a temperature gradient. It protects the meat from heat during cooking. So if you were aiming for medium rare, with these bits, you'd get rare. Whether you like the gradient is a personal choice, but it definitely comes with one drawback. The moment it touches the hot pan, unless you're using indirect heat, the muscle starts to tighten and the bone starts lifting the muscles around the bone, giving you patchy browning, and we're in essence losing flavors. The solution for the home kitchen? We divide and conquer. Very simple, and you can ask your butcher to do this for you. We simply follow the bone, starting with the rib bone. Once you're in, you can pretty much follow the muscle fibers. So you're not doing that much cutting. And whatever flesh we leave on the bone will be braised and form a part of our glaze, so nothing goes to waste. Once we have the rib, we start to remove what is a part of the backbone. Perfect. Simply break it apart to make cooking easier. And the beauty of this process is, while we try to make the most out of our bone, our steak can then be salted and left in the fridge uncovered for up to 3 days. So you could do this ahead of time. The salt can then meaningfully penetrate the steak, seasoning it evenly, breaking down the protein fibers, giving us better texture and moisture retention capabilities. And even a couple of hours, which is how long it would take us to deal with the bone, would go a very long way. Oh, I forgot to borrow some excess fat for the bone. So we'll do it now. Once again, you just follow the fibers. Into the fridge this goes. Now we cook the bone. Now all of a sudden, we're just making a heavily reduced bone broth. First, render the accidentally seasoned fat. If you're short on time, you can chop this up and make it much faster. Once you have a thin layer coating the bottom of the pan, bones go in, and we crank up the heat, start browning. Once your bone is beautifully brown, come out temporarily, and we take the opportunity to skim off almost all of the fat, which we'll use to cook our actual steak later. That is the only reason stopping me from doing the whole thing in the oven, because we want to isolate the pure fat before we introduce the aromatics and imparting their fat-soluble flavors. On that note, you can use any aromatic vegetables you fancy. Today, some sliced onion to form our savory base and give us some subtle sweetness. Some crushed garlic with the skin on, just so that we can enjoy them later. It's very steakhousey to do the cross-cutting, but from experience, I tend to lose the first half and get a very beautiful bottom half. This way, you actually enjoy the full garlic. Now with heat, we simply release the moisture, and that will deglass the pan, mopping up all those beautiful burnt bits. And later on, we evaporate the water content to concentrate their flavors. Season with salt, bearing in mind our fat has been salted. Once the onion's starting to take on some golden color, we start deglassing our pan with just a bit of water, scraping the bottom to lift all the fond, all the flavors. Bone, fat and flesh back in. Resting juices back in. Now, we cover half of this with water. Bring this back to a boil, and this whole thing goes into a preheated oven at 180 for at least an hour to continue roasting and braising at the same time. Our bone reduction is ready. Our steak has had some time in the fridge, during which I've elevated one side just for better air circulation. Now, even though this is one ribeye steak, we're actually dealing with 4 different muscles. We have the cap or the decal, which is the most flavoursome part of the steak. Very beefy and buttery, with high marbling, which makes it cook faster than the rest of the steak. Ideally, you want to bring this closer to the medium end of medium rare. We have the eye, the namesake of the steak, which is slightly milder with a more classic steak-like chew. This you want to bring closer to the rare side of medium rare, keeping it tender and juicy. Closer to the chuck end, you'll often see the complexus muscle, which in terms of both flavor and texture is between the cap and the eye. And I like to cook it similar to the eye so it stays tender. Sometimes you also see the tail, which has very deep flavors but can be chewy. You can either braise it with your bone reduction or, what I prefer, cook it really quickly and keep it very rare. Also, you'll sometimes see the rib cap on top, which is great for burgers or mince, but make sure you don't get charged the same price for the cap. And of course, to get the best out of it, we once again divide and conquer. Now, we often have this large piece of fat, which is very high in connective tissue and can be extremely tasty when cooked properly. Who gets custody of the fat? Well, whoever is more capable of taking more heat, the spinalis. So, just like before, we follow the muscle. Once you're in, you're not really cutting much. You're just pulling and cutting the sinews. There's your tail. We open up the spinalis from the bottom. Spinalis, eye and complexus, tail. We start with the spinalis, and given the fat and connective tissues, we score quite aggressively. This is the bit that foodies have to pretend to like, even when they're extremely undercooked. Not happening today. See the fiber going this way from the sinew, so we just lightly score them. Excess fat from the tail. Now we can cook. Cold pan. We first fold the fat to cover the spinalis, protecting the flesh while we render the fat. Here we have the extra fat that I took from the tail to protect and even out the cooking. Whole thing goes in. Now we gradually bring in some heat. And this could take up to 12-15 minutes for the fat to properly render. So take your time and keep the heat as low as possible to not overcook the beef. Once there's only a thin layer of fat left, and before the spinalis even turns remotely grey, it comes out to rest. As you can see, it started to brown slightly. We keep the fat from the tail, and this will become crispy, almost jerky-like. Skim off some of the excess, leaving a thin layer to make room from our roasted bone fat. Just keep layering flavors. Crank up the heat, the eye goes into sear. Because this is a relatively thick cut, I'm going to flip it every 10-15 seconds to not have a gigantic temperature gradient while browning it, while getting a good sear at the same time. In essence, we're alternating between searing and resting. Once it's close to 45-46 degrees Celsius, steak comes out to rest, and the carryover cooking would bring it to rare of medium rare. Now we cook the spinalis. And because it's thinner and smaller, you actually want to crank the heat even higher to sear the surface without overcooking the inside. Beautiful color. Look at that. Now we crisp up the fat properly. In a very hot pan, the tail just goes in to quickly sear the outside. Tail comes out. Perfect. One last flash. Everything. Stove off. Everything comes out for the carryover cooking to do its magic. Even out the temperature and allow the muscle fibers to relax. First up, we have the eye, which I've kept quite rare today. Perfect. Beautiful spinalis, crispy fat, my favorite bit. Extremely crispy and well-rendered fat. Cut at a bias, cut through the grains. Very yummy tail, cooked almost carpaccio-like. Look at that. Look at that. Tiny bit of watercress for decoration. Very beautiful bone sits on top. And this is my ultimate bone-in ribeye for the home kitchen.